Rage 2 is releasing very soon, and there are some things you need to know. The best way to see what's new is to compare it to its predecessor, 2010's Rage. Let's see what we got here, starting off with number 10. The game still takes place on a post-apocalyptic Earth, having long since been ravaged by the effects of an asteroid impact and the ensuing chaos. But the events of Rage 2 are set way later on in the timeline, 30 years later to be exact, and in that time the world has continued to evolve, grow, and settle. It has referred to the game's world as a post-apocalyptic, as it's not the desert wasteland that you experienced previously, and technology and civilization has gone on to a more advanced state, meaning that the world is way more fleshed out and full of life, and just has a lot more personality in general. This evolution also brings with it a more lush, lived-in world with a ton of variety and new biomes and settlements to explore, and honestly, we can and will go on for a whole separate point about that aspect later on. Next, at number 9, Mutant Bash TV makes a return for Rage 2. For those that didn't play the first Rage, Mutant Bash TV is a wacky show within the wasteland, and it's essentially like a horde mode type thing, but it takes place in an arena with different layouts and hazards. There are some substantial changes, but Mutant Bash TV, this time around, it's still just that, horde mode within an arena with different hazards. But seeing that the combat has changed so drastically with the addition of superpower-like abilities, it really changes up how it works. Now you can really use those hazards to your benefit. So if there are spinning blades or maybe a swinging wrecking ball or something, you can use your shatter ability, which is kind of like a force push type thing, to push enemies into those hazards. The gun combat is much faster and tighter now, and that alone will make Mutant Bash TV way more interesting. Personally, I'm looking forward to see how players speedrun their way through each level. You're more free to visit it whenever you want too, and there's more progression and depth to it overall. Basically, it's more involved than it was in the original Rage, and feels more important to the main crux of the game, judging from our hands-on previews. There's also a bit more of a story and build-up to it once again, and it looks to just be a really good time. And at number 8, there's been a ton of discourse over the last couple years about the viability of single-player games, especially with the rise of more and more games as a service titles, so it's cool to see that Rage 2 was going to be a strictly single-player experience. That's not to say that the original Rage wasn't a big single-player experience, but it did have 2 multiplayer options. Road Rage, which was sort of an arena-based vehicle combat mode, and Wasteland Legends, which was a series of co-op side stories based on things you overheard throughout the main game. Both of those are gone in service of making a pure, straightforward, big single-player experience, and honestly, that's refreshing and a great thing to hear. Moving on to number 7, like most Bethesda-published games, Rage 2 is going to receive a decent amount of post-launch support, but make no mistake, it's definitely not being set up as a game-as-a-service type deal. Rage 2 is going to receive post-launch DLC in both paid and free varieties. When speaking with VG247, its software studio director Tim Willits had this to say on the matter. We'll have some post-launch updates that will add experiences so you keep playing. You can finish the main story if you want to finish it fast, which I encourage people not to do, and you can go back and do other projects. We'll have some free content and we'll have some paid content, so yeah, no solid roadmap or anything as of yet, but it's definitely confirmed that there is more post-launch content on the horizon for Rage 2. Our hope is that they follow more of the Fallout Elder Scrolls DLC pack model, where they add new areas and quest lines with solid, straightforward downloadable expansions, as opposed to smaller, cheaper, more microtransaction-y type things, but hey, only time will tell. Next up, at number 6, y'all remember the playable character from Rage? You probably don't. He didn't say a word. His name was Nicholas Rain, he was an ex-Marine, and he wasn't at all interesting. This time around, you're going to be playing as Walker, who's a ranger, the last ranger, actually. Now, the protagonist will actually have a voice and will talk and interact with the characters and world around them, and actually add some depth to the story. You'll also be picking the gender of Walker too, which is pretty cool. So even if the gender is interchangeable, you'll be surprised. Walker seems to have a lot to say about his or her surroundings throughout the story. And at number 5, a very big under-the-hood difference between Rage and Rage 2 that you actually may not have been aware of is the fact that it runs on a different engine. The first game ran on id's id Tech engine. Instead, Rage 2 was going to be running on Avalanche's Apex engine, which is what Mad Max and the Just Cause games ran on. The engine is better suited for a game like Rage 2 than the id Tech engine, I guess, seeing that their open world is a big part of Rage 2. The open world in Rage 2, I guess, is a combination of the Mad Max open world and Just Cause's world. The world of Just Cause is more of a playground, and Mad Max is a wasteland, and Rage 2 seems to be an open world playground set in a wasteland, so it makes perfect sense that Avalanche's engine would be used over id's. As long as it controls like an id shooter, honestly, I don't care what engine they use. Next up at number 4, the open world in the first game was kind of weird. There were areas where shootouts would take place, areas where you were kind of forced into, and then there were more open areas that were more geared towards playing around with vehicles. So while it did have an open world, it wasn't really that open and free. Rage 2, on the other hand, is going to have a more traditional open world by today's standards at least. Shootouts won't only be in these forced areas made for shootouts, and you can drive your vehicle wherever and whenever you want, seeing that the whole world is open to you right from the get-go. So if you see something off in the distance that looks interesting as soon as you start the game, you can go there. Out in the world, there are different towns and settlements to explore, plus enemy outposts for you to take on. Another big change from the first game are the different biomes. The first game was pretty much just desert wasteland, while Rage 2 has some desert parts, swamplands, forests, and cities, plus some other ones. So the open world this time around definitely has more variety to it than the previous game. And at number 3, different types of guns that all feel different from one another and feel nice is going to be a big thing in Rage 2. One of the highlights from our earlier hands-on time with the game was the Grav Dart Gun. It basically rapid fires these little darts onto an enemy, kind of like the Needler from Halo, but when triggered, the dart's anti-gravity potential kicks in, and depending on where you aim, you can trigger enemies to fling into the sky, or into each other, or, of course, into exploding barrels. There's a pistol and assault rifle that are pretty standard, but then you have the shotgun, which feels just like an id shotgun, and when you aim down the sights, there's actually a secondary fire that fires a powerful slug. One interesting thing is that the developers opted not to include any long-range sniper rifles of any sort. The intention behind this was to keep the players close to the action, even in the open world setting. They want you in it, running, jumping, using your abilities. I can totally get down with this, seeing that a longer range rifle wouldn't really match the pace of the game that the devs have set. Moving on to number 2, a big area that Rage 2 differs and improves on the groundwork laid down by its predecessor is its combat. Rage 2 adds a lot of versatility with new combat options that are definitely a big deal in the grand scheme of things. One of, if not the biggest addition, comes in the form of these new abilities. These new abilities are basically superpowers that you can activate on a cooldown and will really kick some serious ass out in the wasteland. For example, Walker can use a ground pound ability where they jump into the air and follow up with a quick slam back to earth, causing a stunning area of effect and absolutely pulverizing an unarmed enemy if you land right on them. Walker can also pop up a shield barrier that can absorb bullets as it protects them from harm, while also being incredibly dangerous to any enemies that feel the need to get close enough to touch it. A more traditional option comes in the form of the game's vortex grenades, which creates a black hole that sucks enemies and objects into it for a short time before collapsing and shooting anything it had upward and suspending them in midair for you to do as you will. It can be incredibly useful for keeping the chain going and just causing mayhem for an extended period of time. You also have Walker's overdrive mode at your disposal, which was one of the coolest things we've seen so far. Overdrive is the ability that, once triggered, turns everything pink and greatly increases your health regeneration and damage, with the benefits continuing to increase as you keep slaughtering dudes in quick succession. Now, these are just a few of the cool new abilities at Walker's disposal, and we're very interested in seeing what else we can unlock to just wreck shop all across the wasteland. And finally, at number 1, the original Rage was known for its big jumping graphics and how smooth it ran even on consoles. Rage 2 is going to launch with PS4 Pro and Xbox One X support that's going to favor frame rate over resolution, and the game is going to be running at 1080p and 60 frames per second. On PC, it's going to support ultra-wide if you're into that. Those are the big differences, but since we're wrapping up, here's what you need to know. Rage 2 releases May 14th, 2019 on Xbox One, PS4, and PC. There's the Standard Edition, the Deluxe Edition that comes with the game, new missions, the Doom BFG, cheat codes that can also be purchased within the game, a progress booster, Nicholas Rain armor and pistol, and a vehicle banner and skin. Then there's the Collector's Edition that has all the deluxe edition stuff, plus a poster, a steelbook, plus a Ruckus the Crusher talking head, whose voice lines are actually recorded by Andrew WK. And we all love Andrew WK, right? And that's Rage 2 vs. Rage and the 10 biggest changes, but we want to hear from you, so meet us down in the comments and let us know what you think. Are you guys excited to get your hands on Rage 2? And how cool do these new combat abilities look? As I'm sure you already know, hitting the like button really helps us out, and if you're new here for some reason, we put out videos like this every single day. So subscribing is a good idea. As always, thank you for taking the time to stop by and hang out with us. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.